All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming to our first ever mental health forum regarding neurodiversity. This has been something that's been about a month in the making, so it's nice to see all coming together. So joining us today, we have two special guests. Danny comes from TACT and Jeff Sidders from the state of Colorado. We're going to start off with Danny. And Danny, could you please tell us what TACT is all about and tell us what you guys do with TACT, and then we'll move on to Jeff Sidders and what he does for the state.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So as Jesse and team mentioned, I run a nonprofit and founded a nonprofit here in Denver called TACT. And we teach trades and technical skills, specifically skilled trades. And we use them as a vessel for teaching individuals work skills towards getting jobs. And then we really work with each individual and their family to develop strengths in a portfolio and work with a whole bunch of local organizations to get them inclusive, integrated employment. The whole idea is to get people jobs, and not just jobs, but careers. I'm a father of a child with autism, so I tend to look at everything through the dad lens, which is both good and bad, depending upon who you're talking to and when you're talking about it. But it's very personal for me as a father. So I started TACT a few years ago, looking for opportunities for my son. And when I discovered and dove more into just doing anything I could to help my son, and realized that the autism community is the highest unemployed group in the country at a nearly 90% unemployment rate, that just blew my mind. And to think, even with a college education, it's still an 85% unemployment rate. I needed to do whatever I could. And with my family background being in the trades, created TACT. That's in a very short nutshell. And that's what we do. We help, it's about 600 individuals right now getting kids jobs. And our young adults, it's been pretty great. So that's kind of it in a very brief nutshell.
Absolutely. Jeff, Jeff, you want to go ahead and tell you on what you do?
Sure. So I work for the state of Colorado's Department of Labor and Employment, and our mission from the 10,000 foot level is really pretty simple. It's to help every student and every job seeker find the most lucrative and appropriate career pathway opportunity possible, and then connect all the dots out there in the community. And that means we talk to employers. We're working a lot with our candidates through our different talent development and preparation programs. But we also realize that there are certain populations of people that need a little bit additional support. And we want to have those supports available. And now, of course, as we're moving into a new landscape, we're all wondering, what are the budgets going to look like at the federal government level? What are our budgets going to look like at the state level? We're really hoping, and so far the indicators look good, but it's day to day, that our budget for serving individuals who have disabilities or differing abilities will stay at least at the level it's at, or if it does reduce, it won't reduce to such a point that some of the really interesting and I think potentially game-changing initiatives that we have around career pathway development and developing some registered apprenticeships that will specifically help individuals with disabilities move into lucrative careers, that some of that work won't get stalled. So when we talk about then what do we do when we provide additional support and we work within these talent development programs, it's really about trying to meet our individual candidates who, begin working with us as young as 15, and then there is no top end. So somebody could come to us in their 90s, and we do have a few people who are in their 80s who would like to stay in the workforce. They have faced some physical limitations. We want to help them find where they can be situated so they do qualify for our assistance. But what we're trying to do in all cases is meet our candidates where they're at to the extent we can, while still serving the greater good with the resources and with the parameters that we have set up. So one thing over time, and I've been in this job now for 5 years at the state, that we have found is that for individuals who are neurodiverse and who might need some modifications just in the system, let alone with employers and employment and education, but just in working within our system, it's not always as satisfactory a process as we would like. So we're making some adjustments and tweaks, and we're trying out some new avenues to better reach those individuals who are neurodiverse and want to work with our program, but who in the past have become frustrated potentially and have left and maybe not come back. And we want to create a more welcoming environment for all, still knowing that we have to serve the greater good. The goal ultimately is that we help individuals develop the skills so that they can jump onto a career pathway, which may include stops at a training program like Danny offers at TACT. Maybe it includes a stop at a university. Maybe it includes a stop, at some other place, a vocational technical school. These days, we're thinking more in terms of certificates and what competencies are you earning versus necessarily what credential are you earning. And so internally, that's how our development program is working, so that individuals, when they, are getting to that point when they're ready to go out into the job market, can say confidently, I have the skills and I have the background that this employer is looking for. That's part of the story. The second part of the story is why Jesse and I have interconnected and global minded. We have to change the culture within our employers, within broader society, to meet individuals who are neurodiverse closer to where they're at, versus necessarily expecting individuals who have autism or OCD, ADHD to completely modify themselves, their persona, their way of living day to day to accommodate the cultures within a workplace. That education takes time. It takes a lot of perseverance. It takes new, fresh perspectives. Sometimes I'll go in and do a training. I don't really, move the mountain more than a couple of inches. So I want to find somebody from the private sector who can come in and follow up, and maybe we can inspire them just a little bit more. So Danny, in addition to the work that he does, is a very dynamic speaker. And I've had ideas for a long time about how could we bring Danny in to talk to some of my employer partners, not just about TACT, but also just about being the father of somebody with autism, seeing people grow and develop and find success when we can customize a little bit for that individual. And then what you find is the employer says, wow, that worked so successfully. And now other people are coming up who may or may not have a disability and saying, well, maybe I can have a modified schedule too. Or maybe, I can work to my highest potential if we make this small adjustment. And it becomes a real win-win across the board. So in a nutshell, my role in being that liaison out into the community to take our talent pool and connect it to the employers is really about education first and foremost, and making sure I have the right partnerships in hand who can share that messaging with the business community. And that's really why I'm so thrilled to be part of this discussion tonight, and why I've admired what Danny does for a long time, because we're very much on the same track.
Thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. Following up with Jeff said, one thing I want to talk about next is defining what exactly is neurodiversity, since it's kind of a big umbrella term. And, we had a heavy focus on autism, which is important still. But I still want to touch upon what exactly neurodiversity is. Neurodiversity is individual brain function and behavioral traits that are essentially, quote unquote, outside the norm. While it's important to have, while they are distinctive, it's important to realize that it's such a big umbrella term. There are various nuances that sometimes may not, should not even be considered a disability. And that's one thing I want to discuss, is what exactly is neurodiversity. So to you, Danny and Jeff, what do you guys consider neurodiversity essentially, besides what I just said?
You did a great job, Jeff. I'll let you.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll do it. And I'll pare my comments down here too, because I understand the goal tonight is not to filibuster. So we definitely want to share information and make sure a multitude of voices are heard. So when I think of neurodiversity, obviously there's the scientific definition that I was first exposed to in medical school, doing research at Children's Hospital and subsequently beyond. But I'm going to tell you right now that scientific definition was very limiting. And it helped to kind of form my mindset that, wow, somebody with autism, might be a savant, but in most cases, maybe working in a library shelving books, would be an appropriate job destination. And I'm thinking more, honestly, to be honest, I was thinking more in terms of how do we mitigate, some of the things that, present as challengers, not necessarily cure it, but how do we make these individuals better in some way, shape, or form? And that's following the scientific definition. I'm going to tell you straight up right now, the way I view neurodiversity is when we can get human beings who think, perceive, communicate, act a little differently because they have inherently different wiring within their brains. When we can get them exposed to employers, to other elements of society, they can then express their superpowers. And if I can do anything to rebrand neurodiversity, certainly, or autism or spectrum related disorders, I would love to rebrand it as neurodiversity. And then I'd like to take it a step forward and say, hey, this is really a combination of superpowers, or an amalgamation, or whatever proper word we would use to summarize that. So when I think of neurodiversity, that's where I go to, because those differences make everybody stronger as a result. And I could go on all night on individual examples. So Danny, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, thanks. I love that. We actually, my son is a huge superhero fan, so we actually do call it his superhero power, which is kind of funny that you chose that wording. But yeah, I mean, I think Jeff nailed the scientific definition. I think I just look at it, and what I've experienced is it's a gateway to kind of just really understand just how wonderful our world can be when we give people the opportunity to expose who they are.
Very true.
And I think that that giving them the ability to be exposed to just how wonderful they are, and for the first time giving them the opportunity to feel success. And what I mean by that is, for example, at TACT, we teach traits and technical skills, as I mentioned, and a lot of times it's the very first time that a lot of kids have used a hammer or a drill or turned a wrench. And they literally, multiple students have called them their trophies, the things that they actually make. And it's the first time they get a chance to do that. They're not usually allowed and have the opportunity to be exposed to these wonderful opportunities that can create a pathway. I found that within the neurodiverse community, we tend to tell people rather than let them tell us what they are interested in. And so it becomes, when they go to certain organizations looking for opportunities, they're told, well, these are what is available for you. We kind of like to look at it as the reverse of that, where it's kind of the sky is the limit. We should be sitting back, letting them guide us and tell us what things they like, and for us to be working together to find ways of supporting them, recognizing that talent, and then helping them achieve those dreams. And just looking at it from the perspective of recognizing their talent and letting that be the guide towards finding a future seems so simple, but it is kind of a reverse of everything that's in place right now. People don't look at those talents for finding. They put them in a box and tell them, this is what you can do when I want you to do it. And maybe I'll make some accommodations, but it's not even about the accommodations. But we found with our students and clients and getting them jobs is that employers are so intrigued with their talent and how much better they make the workforce, not just because of their diversity, but because of their minds, because of their abilities, because of the way they communicate. It makes everything better. And once you realize that it's a growth mindset and that it's expanding the workforce to make it better, all of a sudden the sky's the limit and it becomes unlimited amount of opportunities. And as Jeff articulated, like, all of our employers that hire our kiddos end up wanting more, and recognize how awesome it is. Yeah, I can keep going with that too. I'm just going to stop there because I know we've got lots of questions, which I appreciate.
Wonderful. So I think now we should probably get into what are the various conditions and traits of people who are neurodiverse, especially with people who are autistic, ADHD, and so forth. Knowing these traits is probably the next big step in identifying and helping these people.
There's very, very stereotypical traits. Is that what you said, Jesse? Sorry, because I kind of lost the connection there a little bit. Was it traits?
Yeah, like the general traits. No, everyone's different, but the standard traits that are most common in these types of people.
There's the ones like, well, I'll speak for my son, right, as a dad. So looking at my son, the ones that he tends to have that people would probably identify as having autism. He has a lot of anxiety. He doesn't make eye contact with you. You probably notice I very rarely am staring directly at the camera, because in most cultures in the world, that's actually considered not polite. But I would say there, he has very hard time communicating, at least with language. That's one of the things that my son has. He can text and use alternative forms of communication so well. And it's been interesting having a phone with him, because he texts me and uses proper grammar and punctuation and things that adults with fancy degrees don't use, but villain just rocks it. It's amazing. Those would be some stereotypical things. I think there's a lot of rigidity. A lot of times there's sometimes frustration. Gosh, there's a lot of stereotypical things. I can't say that there's anything that I've seen that I would say is personally from experience working within this population and within our community, things that I would say that everybody has. I mean, I know that there's things that, boxes that doctors check in the DSM and things that we look for when we're diagnosing, but it really is a very full spectrum. And yeah. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I could answer that from a couple different perspectives. If you put the physician hat on, then, you certainly break the traditional presentation for somebody who is on the spectrum down into two categories. I think of it in neurocognition, the ability to focus, to concentrate, to remember what's retention look like, and then, social cognition. So the ability to interrelate socially. Do we pick up cues from other people's body language? Do we react appropriately as defined by societal norms, in any given situation? And the answer is no, in the case of those who, are on the spectrum and have these, related conditions, ADHD, OCD, autism. There are traits that can be variable and intermixed between those within diagnoses. And when you live in the world of the label and you live in the world of the diagnostic and in the medical environment, again, the mindset tends to come back to, okay, you have a deficit. Let's fix your deficit. Then you can pull out your strengths and you'll have something better to offer. You can live a fuller and richer life. When you put that aside and maybe, put the hat on of, as I've come to find out, I would, maybe a little more of a social work mindset or a partnership mindset, that we're in this together versus I'm the authority and you're the patient, then, you can make a switch. And when I say you, I mean anybody can make a switch, especially those of us who have been at those, in those clinical positions, to viewing it from a strength-based perspective. And then those labels and all of those characteristics and all of those things that don't match the societal norm, they can actually become real assets if the conditions get set in the right way in any particular environment. And that environment could be a workplace. It could be another community gathering point. All of these things, where people shy away and maybe don't want to make eye contact initially. I have seen a 65-year-old person who probably made eye contact with 10 people in his entire life. And I'm not exaggerating because he told me that word for word. I've seen him through employment and through a nurturing, supportive environment with ongoing coaching, arrive at a place now where he's in his 5th year of employment at an assisted living facility, and he is treated like Chef Gordon Ramsay. He comes out at the start of his shift, and everybody wants to give him a hug and give a high five. And he walks the dining room. That's the first thing he does. That's the first thing on his task list. When I first met him, again, the societal norms would say, wow, this person is odd. This person definitely has a deficit. And now, certainly that tendency in new situations is still there, but he has adapted, he has grown, but the people around him have learned to accept him for who he is also. And so they're much more focused on what do you bring and how do you enhance versus, how do you present as different. That's been the biggest awakening in my life and why I really actually prefer to be where I'm at now versus where I've been in the past. And where I think we're headed in society, because we have this thing called technology, AI, virtual reality, that's going to adapt our environments in mind-blowing ways. When we think about smart cities, and I promise I'll be quiet in just a second, Jesse, so you can take control again, but we're going to have such, adaptive possibilities going forward that people will be able to truly express themselves and gain comfort initially in those social interactions in more of a simulated way, so that eventually when they're more in person, it's going to be a lot more comfortable. We have clinical trials underway with virtual reality right now at the Department of Human Services with young adults who are incarcerated with autism. It's going to be fascinating to see a year or two from now how that plays out.
Well, Jeff, if you need any help with that, we use it right now every day at TACT since we are online. So if you want to see how that's working and training actively,
yeah,
the things we're doing right now, the good old-fashioned Oculus Rift, man, has been
Yes.
going at it. So, and
That's it. That's it,
yeah.
Danny. There you go. That's bridging the future with the present. And obviously, Jesse, I think your point with that question is, give the audience an understanding, how these different conditions, manifest. So there are true challenges with anxiety, which can impair focus and concentration, or with, the level of stimulation that's going on in the brain and the brain's ability to process information, at variable rates at different times. When we think about ADHD or the compulsions that come along with OCD, but all of those things can be remedied when you put a person in an environment that enriches and enhances the strengths. The deficits will tend to blend into the background, but we have to set the playing field right, and we have to create the conditions for that.
And
so that's where I'll go.
To piggyback off of that, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's one of the things that when I mentioned exposure, why exposure is so important, in the sense that we're taking a group of people that have no exposure to a lot of these careers, right? So like we use the skilled trades. Right now across the country, nobody has shop class anymore. Nobody has auto mechanics class anymore. So all of a sudden to say, okay, I'm going to take you and put you in this career right now, just education in general, we put people in little white cubicles in front of a computer and say, you're going to do X, Y, and Z with no exposure to it. Well, how can they possibly know if that's something that they're interested in? They'll be trained in it. So take a neurotypical person, whatever that means, and take them and put them into an environment or a career which they've had no exposure. If you said to me, Danny, you're going to go be an accountant right now, I would be freaking out because I don't know anything about accounting, anything about numbers, well, a little bit about numbers, but I would not be comfortable, right? So if we're not giving people the opportunities and the exposure to these careers, how can we possibly express them or expect them to thrive? So we have to first provide the opportunities and exposure for those. And then we have to provide the training with that. So that's where I think organizations like TACT come in, because it's exposing kids and young adults to the possibilities of their strengths for the first time, where they're not getting that because they're not going to get it tragically in other programs. Two, then we're providing the training. So when they go into an actual career, we call our facility a facility site, a simulation site, in the sense that we set it up where it doesn't seem like a classroom. It's close enough to an actual job setting that when there's that transition, and we look at ourselves as a transition program into employment, it's a natural, authentic step, as opposed to, okay, I'm sitting in a classroom in rows, staring at a whiteboard or a Promethean board or whatever, and now I'm going to go step into a workplace. The two aren't related at all. So, I mean, no wonder that, even anybody, not talking about the neurodiverse community, but the neurotypical community by and large, just a few years ago, Time Magazine did an article where 85% of college graduates were moving back at home because they weren't finding success, right? There's now a unique situation in the job market where they're actually talking about younger generations actually, quote unquote, ghosting their employers, where they find another job and they just leave because they've never had an experience or exposure or the opportunity to be trained in that actual profession. So, it's kind of a failure in our cultural setting in the sense that we're not setting anybody up for success if that's the way we're going about it. And so when you find that you're setting people up for success and you're recognizing their talents, Jeff's 100% correct. All of a sudden you find all these quote unquote stereotypes in regards to attention span and transition and rigidity are all of a sudden broken down because the person feels comfortable and recognized. So, like Jeff was talking about the gentleman with eye contact, we had a person come through our program, awesome young man. We just got him a job. And he was, when he started with our program, he had been at a facility school locally. And at that facility school, he had spent 4 years, and they were teaching him to track the room. In 4 years, they were unable to get him to find his lunchbox in a cubby. Within 4 weeks at our program, he could read a tape measure into a 16th of an inch, and his on-task time had increased from 20 minutes to over 90 minutes. In 4 weeks. So what we achieved in 4 weeks far outpaced what other experience was in 4 years. That was merely because they were sticking them in a situation that wasn't geared towards success. We have to, I think, as just a group, look at what we're doing and how we're going about measuring success and how we're going about measuring the right opportunities to really help people be successful.
That's it, Danny. How are we measuring? How, when we are measuring for some predetermined outcomes, and we're saying, okay, your IQ came up a little bit short, so therefore you fit into this population with these expectations, we're completely missing the boat.
Yeah.
IQ levels are going up now with the use of virtual reality and with the use of new testing measures. People who were nonverbal in non-simulated environments are becoming verbal in simulated environments and bringing those skills back into the real world. There's some cutting edge research institutions. University of Pittsburgh has been one. Vanderbilt, Cornell, are doing some other things. Stanford, that are just resulting in really amazing advances. But, I would make the case, I will take almost anybody with, quote, ADHD any day of the week, and I have no less than probably 25 employer partners where we could go and explore the job ladders. And that ADHD diagnosis is going to be the single greatest asset that person's going to bring to the job. They will not, in fact, be attention deficit when they're on the job. Their orientation to task, their ability to stay on task is going to be accelerated given the nature of the environment and the variability in the tasks, the types of jobs, and also the physical routine that they're going through in accomplishing that.
And agree. Then with that, Jeff, just to piggyback further, because I'm in alignment and agreement with you, I would say that despite the ADHD or autism or whichever diagnosis or label we're choosing to use for any individual, if we set them up in a situation where we develop a portfolio to recognize their strengths, and then you mentioned earlier about employers, and then we pitch it to the employer, not even mentioning. So like at TACT, for example, we've won 2 car shows, first place in both. They're big car shows, not like a King Super parking lots. They're bigger car shows. And we didn't tell anybody that the cars were restored by individuals with autism. We just let the quality of the work stand on itself. And then after the kids won and people came up to us and were talking to us, then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this was done by people with autism. We had no idea. Because inherently employers will look at a label of whichever one we just mentioned, and they'll have a stigma, and that will keep them from even seeing amazing ability. So if we're able to present it as looking completely aside from all those other things and just saying, look at how awesome this person is and look at what they can do and look at how they're going to make your workplace better. And once the employer sees that, then they want that for their workforce, because they get it for all kinds of things like we use all the time. And Jeff, I know you do too. That on task time for an individual with autism, for example, is exceptionally higher. For example, Bill Morris at Blue Star Recyclers, they see you measured his staff. They have a 98.6% on task time. The average American is 49%.
I know. So, I was going to say, let's do a show of hands, and where do we each individually apprise ourselves with on task time?
Exactly. Well, I mean, what happens is people are on task at the coffee machine or on Facebook or on LinkedIn or, talking about what they were doing at the club the other night or whatever. They're at work, but they're not really working. So when you are going to an employer, you say, here's an awesome person. Their on task time is near 100%. Their retention rate is near 94%. Then all of a sudden you've got a worker or an employer that's looking, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get an amazing amount of productivity.
That's right.
Now, we also then, among that exposure, part of the things we do at TASK and what we call the simulation site is it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There is absolutely a learning curve. So what we do at TACT is we kind of take that learning curve on. So when we're working with employers and we're simulating it, we're simulating that work site at TACT. So that learning curve is on us. So then when they get to the employer, they're ready to rock and roll. Because if you go to an employer and you say all these great things that are completely true about these amazing individuals we're working with, and the employer sees a slower than learning curve, then they're not going to believe you. They're not going to hire more kids, and they're not going to invest in our community. So it's not just setting the kid up for success with the young adult, it's setting the employer up for success.
Right. That's right.
I have a question.
To do that, we're few and far in between.
Yeah, I have a question from a corporate standpoint. I work at Western Union, and most of the time conversation is around race, age, or gender. It's not really around neurodiversity. So I'm curious, are there any organizations that set a good example, that open up opportunity for neurodiverse people and are actually creating a talent pipeline for them? And what are they doing? Because I would love to know.
Yeah. I've got an answer, Jeff, but if you
Yeah,
want
go right ahead, and then I can probably expand on that a little bit, or maybe give another example.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the great things I love about, honestly, the skilled trades too. When you go into one of our job sites for any of our kids, it's people from every background you can possibly imagine. So I would say that kind of just uniquely within the skilled trades, people are hiring, doesn't matter what your background is, what your diversity is, they're looking for ability and talent. And the neat thing, even through this whole COVID thing, is it's considered essential workforce, right? So, I mean, I could name the companies by name, but for example, like we work with a company called Sturgeon Electric, and they hire a bunch of our kids. They're literally, quite literally, doing the 1,200 lights that are now lighting up the new I-70 corridor through Denver will be done by TACT kids, which is pretty super cool. And when you go to their job site, it's amazing. I mean, they hire, it doesn't matter what your background is, they're looking for talent. And so just that would be an example of just one of the ones that we work with. That's pretty amazing. So I would say in that, and they're all essential, right? They're still working. So our kids are still getting jobs, still being valued, and there's room for advancement with that, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so that is an amazing example, skilled trades. I think there's so much potential there, and we're starting to work in that direction, and hopefully we can do that even more with Danny and the leadership that he's really putting forth with a lot of our employers who will hire on the back end of training. When we think about other kinds of corporate settings, Dominique, one setting that comes to mind is IT and technology. And Microsoft and SAP were some of the early pioneers taking a European model called Specialisterna and applying a 2 to 3 week academy experience for individuals who have neurodiversity, who have autism, to come in there and work together in cohorts. They complete different tasks, they complete assignments, they work together. But I'll tell you what's happened over a period now of 4 to 5 years of doing this, maybe a little bit longer. The individuals who typically get hired at the end of that are individuals that the companies realize probably could have worked their way through the traditional competitive standard hiring process. They were a cut above typically in terms of their social skills, their teamwork orientation, some of those other things. And the folks who maybe with a little bit of additional support, or maybe by using a more non-traditional hiring process, even though the academy was taught as being really groundbreaking and non-traditional, they're really still not getting through the door. So what we're doing, and we're doing this here in Colorado as well, maybe even as much as anybody else in the country, we're doing it, instead of focusing on let's hire a cohort of 10 people all at the same time, let's try 1 or 2. And let's try an experiential learning opportunity where we do an internship that the state pays for. You don't have to necessarily, the employer doesn't have to pay anything. They don't have to coach the individual. That's being provided, by us in our follow along services. And it could be an on-ramp into employment, an opportunity for the employer to get used to the way this individual presents, and for us to buy us some time to do some education as well. There's even other models around using teams of individuals who are neurodiverse to do project work. So you don't even see these individuals, you don't interview them, but they're being paid by a state of Colorado or a staffing agency. And then at the end of the project, if it goes well, the employer could say, hey, wow, this was amazing. I'd like to bring this person in for an interview. Guess what? If they walk in and they look a little different, their hair is not as finely combed or whatever the case is, they're eccentric. They're, something else that's more positive in terms of the way they might be viewed, versus if we do that whole interview up front situation, they might look at a person even before a word is spoken and say, wow, this person just isn't presenting like we're used to seeing. And so it's really about the demonstration of the skills and in the capabilities, and showing employers what the talent level can be like. And that's certainly, IT has been one of the earliest adopting industries for that. But I've had internships, at least I've gotten as far as internships, not entire teams of people set up yet, but internships in a variety of corporations, from engineering to, a little bit in healthcare. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I can't, I'm not going to try to do it alone, but those are some of the other examples that are out there and where the thinking is most cutting edge.
Wonderful.
That's great.
So there are two things I want to chime in. One's a remark, the second one will be another topic question. I myself was diagnosed with autism when I was 21, and of course by then I was too old for any of the social programs that they had for younger children. And my curriculum was different with as far as the stereotypes and traits go. But with me, I pace around a lot. I have difficulty with eye contact, and I have social anxiety to the fact that I can't do large groups of people. One-on-one interviews are fine, but when it comes to large groups, I can't do it. Another thing I've noticed is that I struggle with following verbal instructions. I've noticed when I did my research that something that a lot of atypical neurodiverse people have as well is that they struggle to follow directions. We take things literally. And so, following instructions that are in jest or they're more so of a topic than actual step-by-step process is challenging for us, especially for me. So just those things from my personal end that kind of relate to the various traits and stereotypes that neurodiverse people have. So the next topic question is, following from our most recent discussion, is some of the workplace challenges, like standard workplace challenges that people who are neurodiverse have if they go into a workforce and their employer doesn't know about their condition. So are there any challenges that you've heard repeatedly, common challenges from people who are neurodiverse, since a lot of times they struggle to keep a job? Like, what are the reasons why they can't keep a job, or the reasons why they can't find employment?
Yeah.
Just real quick, I just want to be mindful of people's time. We do have 10 minutes till 7. So if we want to just quickly answer this question and open up the floor to questions, that would be awesome.
Just real quick, Jesse, the biggest thing that I've seen is transportation. That's been, is a huge barrier for employment. Has been just transportation. I mean, Hester and some other local things that try, mean very well, but are far from reliable in getting people where they need to be. So that would be one of the bigger hurdles that I've seen. I think that, if you, as we were mentioning earlier, if you're setting the person up for success and you're setting the employer up for success, kind of by the exposure and training that we were referencing, there isn't really a big turnover. So for example, in the sense, right now the state measures 90 days employment retention. That's it, 90 days.
That's right, we do.
So that's not very long. I mean, that's still within the wheelhouse of, hey, this isn't working out, thanks, or some other opportunities that are provided, but it's certainly not a long-term solution. So I think it's kind of investment more on the front end so that the long-term goes better. So I think that any of those kind of hiccups that you hear about are really just pointing out the lack of us getting it right from the get-go as a culture. So, I mean, the bigger things that I would say, and Jeff, I want you to chime here, I don't want to be mindful of people's time too, is the transportation. And then SSI has been a big thing as well, where families are afraid to lose that as they get into jobs, where the families are afraid to jump in because they don't want to lose that and they don't understand it. And it's written in a way that, I mean, I have a master's degree, Jeff has a doctorate. It's hard to understand that.
It is very hard.
Not written in a way that like, oh, I completely get this. It's written where you will look at smart people in a room and be like, I have no idea what they're saying, let alone actually adhere to it. So those have been two big hurdles. But Jeff, what if?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So the logistic barriers, just as you mentioned, the transportation certainly has been big, managing benefits. And then the other two that I would just add on to that, if we do Danny's methodology, if we follow that pathway forward and we take it all the way to the doorsteps of our employers, we take some of the best learning from Microsoft and SAP and hopefully VMware, a new IT company here in Colorado that's launching a Hire for Autism initiative. Hopefully they'll take and adopt some of that. We can just take that competitive standard interview and throw it in the trash can. I don't like the competitive standard hiring environment for anybody that's on this call who may consider him or herself to be, quote, neurotypical, exactly whatever that means. I think that's not a good way to evaluate talent and capabilities. When anxiety can rule the day, when lack of eye contact can be the biggest takeaway from a meeting, yet this person could have come in there and within a month probably innovated in a way that your senior engineers aren't doing. Not saying everybody's a savant. I'm just saying bringing a new, fresh not only a fresh set of eyes, but a brain that's wired differently, can approach these problems from a totally different vantage point. So that's one. And then the transitions which occur at work, whether it's I have a couple of people working that I help to get jobs at, say, a place like DaVita, 6-figure data analyst, an engineer working in 6 figures at Ball Aerospace. They suffer from the same challenges with these rapid transitions at work that individuals at Blue Star Recyclers are doing in more entry-level disassembly positions. If you prime the pump right and you give employers that understanding, okay, and they can, a lot of our candidates, a lot of our workers can do it themselves, but we are having those discussions. If you want to make a transition and add new tasks or, whatever, a little bit more advanced lead time will make a big difference. And we're starting to cross some of those bridges out there as well. But a good corporate plan or strategy would accommodate those individuals, and I'll bet it would be better for the entire culture as a whole.
Wonderful. Great.
It looks like we have 2 questions. One from Eric. Jeff, I would like to know, is neurodiverse
an atypical?
Yeah, sorry.
How are those terms being interrelated? Yeah. Well, a lot of this comes almost down to how the community is defining itself. So we have person first language, and then we have identity first language. Person, and when we look at the autism community, saying, well, that is a person who has autism versus I am autistic or she is autistic, the autism community has said, well, actually the identity, description is what we prefer in a lot of cases. They have defined that. I've heard the word atypical used, quite honestly, more often by individuals who either self-disclose or have a diagnosis of a spectrum disorder than I've heard, other branches of society using it. I always defer back to whatever language is most strength enhancing. So whatever in the end is going to help somebody else on the receiving end of that terminology to see past what that first appearance is to all of the wonderful diverse traits that a person may have, not seeing past the one tree that you see most prominently, so you can see actually the entire forest.
That's great.
Next question from Franna. Where do you see
Eric.
the conversation? Yes, thank you, Eric. Where do you see the conversation around neurodiversity going in the next 10 or 20 years?
Personally, I mean, for us in the skilled trades, it's about ready to just take off, in the sense that as baby boomers retire, we've got a situation where there is roughly 31 million baby boomers that are on the verge of retiring. And skilled trades already have just a huge labor shortage, in the sense that, and I'm not exaggerating in the slightest, that entry level pushing a broom at a construction site is between $18 to $20 an hour. So all of a sudden, these careers, they're not minimum wage jobs without room for advancement. These are jobs that, a superintendent at a construction site makes 6 figures. If you take it further, I mean, you're at doctor's salary without a college degree, and there's 31 million openings. So all of a sudden, the trades become this new quote unquote white collar position, where there is an untapped pool of people in the neurodiverse community that have now the opportunity, and finally getting the opportunity to have their strengths recognized. And there's tons of positions open. It's just setting the pieces in place to actually make sure they get that exposure and they have the guidance towards those pathways. I think for us, it's going to be, what I'm seeing, it's going to just kind of change the game. And as Jeff mentioned,
Yes.
As we look at innovation, specifically the way that an individual with autism chooses their way their minds work. I mean, Temple always says those are the people that put Neil Armstrong on the moon. I mean, if you go to NASA, they're the folks that are the ones that are genuinely innovating. We didn't call it things like that back then, but what it is. So, I mean, when we finally start recognizing it and filling these gaps that we're opening up in our culture, I think it's going to just take off.
In the next 10 years, the word autism is going to be associated widely with the word innovation. If you want to rebrand it, it'll be well beyond neurodiversity. It will be actually into the sphere of innovation. It's being monetized right now. Studies through Accenture, studies through Forbes Insight, which was interesting in 2016 that Forbes Insight actually found within Fortune 500 companies that neurodiversity was generating as much, if not more, innovation than race, gender, and ethnicity. It's just harder to track because these folks are not raising their hand and talking a whole heck of a lot. So they had to go really deep diving under the surface to see who their top performers were in different business units. But I think innovation is clearly going to be where it's at, because our smart city, just the way we're going to be using technology to make lives easier, more accessible, and more personalized for everybody in all of our communities. Individuals then who are neurodiverse are going to be better able to blend into that, and they're going to be the ones who naturally rise to those levels of architecting it. They will be the ones to be the thought leaders. And I think we're going to find then that autism is more evolution rather than a disorder or a deficit. It's actually been leading us down the pathway towards something a lot better.
Agreed. As long as we stay in that other way and let them lead us.
Exactly, Danny. And that's why I'm no longer the doctor versus the patient. I'm actually the student more often than I am the expert. That's the much better mindset.
Awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you both so much for joining this conversation. I know we all had a chance to connect in a conversation before this, and then a podcast that we recorded and put online. We will also be distributing this out online for people to watch at a later time. I also just wanted to reiterate that the Young Professional Leaders Group is a place for young professionals and seasoned professionals to come together, share perspectives in entrepreneurial mindset, financial literacy, and mental health. And that means a lot of different things. So my team and I are working through creating a leadership development program. We're going to roll out in May. We're going to trial it out for about 4 weeks. We're going to start talking about mindset. We'll always be talking about financial literacy. I think that's the key to really unlocking a lot of people's true potential. So make sure that you get plugged in on that. And also we will be, thank you, Eric, for reminding us, the Global Minded Conference is coming up in June, and I would love to get you guys all plugged into the conference. It is going to be online, maybe some sort of in person, but also we have opportunities to mentor other young professional students that just have not had opportunity or resources available. So we really have an opportunity to create change in a lot of different areas in the world. So thank you so much for joining.